Good evening. I'm David Waller, President of the San Diego Inventors Forum, and I'd like to welcome you to our first Zoom general meeting presentation. But before I introduce our speaker, I'd like to update you on the status of our club. In April of last year, AMN Healthcare closed its doors to public use of their auditorium due to the pandemic. Following that closure and the restrictions placed on gatherings by the state of California, San Diego Inventors Forum, in compliance with those restrictions, ceased holding general meetings. Since that time, we are all affected by the health risks imposed by COVID-19. For myself, I was the sole provider for my mother. Near the end of 2020, her health had begun to decline, and on January 17th, she succumbed to a COVID infection contracted only a week earlier. Others have similar stories of how this virus impacted their lives and their families. The San Diego Inventors Forum sends its condolences to those who have lost loved ones during this difficult time. And for those who have contracted COVID and were able to overcome, we celebrate your recovery. Recently, Leslie Wagner resigned the presidency and requested that I take her position for the remainder of her term. We are saddened by Leslie's resignation. She has contributed much over the years, and I would like to thank her personally for her dedication to our club. Happily, Leslie has offered to help in any way that she can as we begin our long path to having monthly in-person general meetings. That being said, there are a number of issues that must be handled by the board of directors at the corporate level. Once these items are resolved and we begin reorganizing our club, we will start with establishing the responsibilities and authorities manual for the board of directors, revitalizing the club's website with the assistance of our webmaster, Grazina, who has done an excellent job over the past several years managing our site, developing an events calendar for 2022, and establishing a proposed annual budget for the upcoming year. This will require a significant amount of time from our board of directors, and I hope that you will be patient as we move through this challenging time. I would like to continue to have monthly general meetings through Zoom for the remainder of 2021 and hope that you will continue to view our presentations. Thank you for your continued support. This evening, Michele Nash Hoff will be giving a presentation on how to select the right process and sources for your products. The presentation that she was scheduled to give April 2020 when AMN Healthcare closed its doors. Michele is currently one of our board of directors and the founder and president of Electrofab Sales, an agency specializing in helping manufacturers select the right processes for their products since 1985. Michele is currently a member of the board of directors of American Jobs Alliance and chair of the California chapter of the Coalition for Prosperous America. Michele earned a BA from San Diego State University in 1982 and a certificate in total quality management in 1993. She is a 1994 graduate of the San Diego's leadership program, Lead San Diego, and earned a yellow belt certificate in Lean Six Sigma in 2014. She is the author of 3 books, the most recent being in 2017, Rebuilding Manufacturing, the Key to American Prosperity. She has blogged in the past for HuffPost and Industry Week, and currently blogs for the www.themadeinamericamovement.com. She is an authorized speaker for the Reshoring initiative. So without delay, here's Michele. Thank you, Michele.
Thank you, David. The United States leads in innovation. There's actually no lack of American ingenuity and innovation today. Each year, thousands of new products are invented. Many receive patents, but most are never produced. Knowing how to create a product or invent a product doesn't mean you know how to manufacture it and get it to market. What you need to realize to get started is you have to recognize your limitations of what your knowledge and expertise is. And then if you don't have all the knowledge and expertise you need, which most people don't, you need to utilize experts in the fields where you need help, whether it's product design, engineering, whether it's patent and licensing, selecting of the right materials to make your product, how to make a prototype and where to get it done, and then how to get into production manufacturing of your product once your prototype has been approved and works, and then how to market your product. So these are all different areas that you need to know, and it's very rare that one person knows all of these, has all these areas of expertise. So there's many ways to manufacture products after you're done with the prototype stage. You can have your parts or sub-assemblies subcontracted to vendors and then assembled in-house at your own manufacturing facility that you set up. You can have parts and sub-assemblies subcontracted to vendors and then assembled by that contract manufacturer. And then you would only ship finished products to your customers. And then you can hire a turnkey contract manufacturer that does everything for you, from buying parts and assembling them and then packaging them and actually drop shipping them to your customer. Or if you really want to set up a long-term manufacturing company, you can do, everything in-house or just sub out what you don't want to buy the equipment to do the manufacturing. But it's very expensive to do it this way, and more companies are turning away from in-house manufacturing to subcontracting to vendors. There's actually many ways to make specific parts. For example, in plastic alone, you can have machine, you can have vacuum and pressure formed, injection molded, blow molded, rotational molded, and then you can have composite materials that are a combination of plastic materials plus other technologies. They're called composite, and they can be made by either laying up sheets of material. You can mold the composites, or you can spin the composites into shapes like golf club shafts. So these are some examples of parts that can be injection molded or pressure formed. You can make a housing in low quantities pressure formed that almost looks like an injection molded part, but it has much lower tooling costs. For rubber, you can have cast, which is poured into a mold, either urethane or RTV silicone. You could have it compression molded. You can have dip, which is how plastic gloves are made, or you could have it extruded, which is long strips of material, usually injection molded of rubber, liquid injection molding, where the rubber is actually liquefied, and then transfer molding. The compression molding and the transfer molding are probably the most common for production parts. Here's some rubber molded parts these are molded and die cut parts. For metal, there's many ways you can have it. For casting alone, you have, several different processes: sand casting, permanent mold casting, investment casting, rubber plaster mold, V process, and die casting. I've actually sold all of these different casting processes in the past. You can have very thin metal parts chemically etched. You can have parts that have depth to them that are either deep drawn or hydroform. You can have parts electroform, fabricated from sheet metal, whether it's on a turret press or laser cut, or it actually water jet cut. You can have parts that are forged, which is high strength material, has really high strength properties. You can be plasma cut or machine or metal stamp. There's metal stampings that goes from short run metal stampings all the way to high volume metal stampings. So here's just a few of examples of kinds of parts that can be made in different processes. So there's many variables to selecting the right manufacturing process. Some of the things you need to consider are which environment will the product be used? Will it be a product for an office use or an industrial use in a factory? Is it a consumer product for use at home? Is it a product that's suitable for, rural areas, probably maybe farm equipment, or in the desert? Or is there a marine application or aerospace application? All of these different environments require different kinds of materials and will determine the ways that you can make your product to meet the requirements of that environment. And then you may need to get certifications to sell to certain customers, such as FDA approval for a medical product, UL approval for any product that requires electricity, mil spec to sell to the government. Then there's new certifications that have come into effect in the last 15 to 20 years, such as being ISO certified, or for aerospace, it's AS 9100 certified, and ITAR registered means you have to be registered with the Defense Department to be able to sell a product to a defense contractor or a military agency. And then you need your production volume forecast will determine your methods of producing parts, because certain processes are suitable for low volume and other processes are suitable for high volume. And then there's processes that can be sort of in between, from like low to mid, and then ones that only can be done in high process, like the high volume stamping method. So we also have the benefits now, especially in the last 15 years, of a process called additive manufacturing. 3D printing is one of the processes, but there's actually many processes now: stereolithography, laser sintering, fused deposition modeling. These are just a couple. There's now more than 10 different processes that you can use for additive manufacturing, and every year new processes are being added. There's actually a whole industry and magazines devoted to just additive manufacturing now, and I try to go to a technical session at a trade show at least every other year, just to keep up with the different methods of additive manufacturing that are being added, because it's such a changing technologies. For example, several years ago, you had to have prototype rubber molded parts made by prototype molds, because they didn't have any materials that could be done by additive manufacturing. But about 4 years ago, they added the materials, the elastomeric materials, so now you can have rubber products made by additive manufacturing. So this is a technology. This is enabling a lot of inventors and entrepreneurs and startup companies to get their prototypes done by additive manufacturing, instead of having to go offshore to get cheap prices, where you have to buy like a minimum lot of 500 or 1,000 parts before you even really know that your product is going to work. So additive manufacturing has really helped the inventor and entrepreneur to get their product to market, because they can get a working prototype that they can use to make a video of it in action and doing what it needs to do to show its benefits, and they can use that video to be able to get investors for their product. So additive manufacturing has really helped be able to keep manufacturing in the United States and not have it go offshore. You have the choice of where you're going to make your products. Do you want it to be a made in USA product, or are you willing to have it be offshore to a foreign country like China or Vietnam? Or do you want it near source? Near sourcing refers to sourcing in either Mexico or Canada. And of course, here in Southern California, we are so close to Mexico that there are more people choosing to have near sourcing to Mexico, especially now that Mexico actually has labor costs that are equal to China. Remember that labor costs are usually only under 30% of your product. So if you're only saving labor to go offshore or even nearshoring, it may not be worth going to an offshore location to have your product made. The decision to offshore has been based on faulty assumptions. Some of these were overseas laws will protect your intellectual property. Overseas suppliers have the same morals and work ethics that we do in the United States. Longer lead times won't affect costs much. Communication won't be a problem. Travel costs won't add much to cost calculations, and increase in delivery and quality costs won't be significant. All of these have proved to be false because, for one thing, China does not, shall we say, recognize our intellectual property. They steal it. If you have your prototype made in China and give away your technology, have your whole product made by one vendor in China, they may get the same product out the back door sold under their name before you can even get your product to market. And we know that overseas suppliers do not have the same morals and work ethics that we do. And you remember, you're having parts coming by, overseas, you're having them shipped by, ships. And that takes weeks instead of days, where you can get parts in days in the United States. And remember, you're also dealing with people that English is not their first language, so communication is not necessarily easy. And I've had customers that have had to send one of their engineers over to China as often as once a month to be able to supervise things that are in production to make sure that the Chinese vendor is doing things the way the US customer wants them to be done. So that can be a significant cost. I mean, round trip, just the airfare to China is, more than $1,000. So there's hidden costs also to sourcing offshore. You have currency fluctuations. The value of your dollar compared to the local currency of that country fluctuates from month to month. There's always a higher cost than you expect to managing your offshore contract. And then it's more difficult to make design changes. If your product is going to be stable for at least 2 or 3 years, that wouldn't be a problem. But if you need to upgrade your product or make some design changes because something is failing in service with your customers, then you have to be able to want those design changes to be made easily and quickly. You also have quality problems. One of the biggest problems with Chinese vendors is they substitute inferior materials to the ones you have specified. And you can't tell unless the product fails or you have the material tested by an independent laboratory. Otherwise, you can't really tell whether it's in a different material. Then you have legal liabilities because you could have a Chinese competitor selling your product as if it was yours under your name, but it's really made by them, and your customers will then come to you for warranty, meeting your warranty promises. Then you have the travel expenses, and the time and effort to make a transition is always longer than you expect it. And as we mentioned before, you can have poor communication dealing with people whose English is not their primary language. And then you have intellectual property infringement. China is the most egregious intellectual property infringer, but there's other countries where you can have problems too. Then you have the cost of inventory, because most Chinese vendors will give you a minimum order, and you may have to be ordering a lot more than you would be immediately using. So then you have to pay for inventory space to house that and have a safety stock, because remember, you're going to be having to rely on products taking 6 to 8 weeks to get to you from offshore. So you have to have a safety stock to cover that 6 to 8 weeks to sell your products. so you aren't out of stock for your customers. And in the last several years, the offshore dynamics are changing. Labor rates in China have risen 10 to 15% year over year since 2007, which is why China is now equal to Mexico. And the component and material prices are increasing. And in the last 3 years, and they're still in effect, the tariffs imposed by the Trump administration have not been stopped. So we still have tariffs on steel and aluminum, which has benefited rebuilding the American steel and aluminum industries. And another factor is the U.S. has become very automated with the use of robots and automated production lines. So we have increased our productivity, which has lowered our costs of manufacturing. And then you have the problem of exchange rate variables depending on when you place an order to when your order is invoiced and paid for. So that can be a factor in your profit. So the concept of total cost of ownership is is required to understand all these ramifications of supplier selection and material selection. Total cost of ownership is an estimate of direct and indirect costs. The 13th edition of APICS, which stands for American Purchasing and Inventory Control Dictionary, says, in supply chain management, the total cost of ownership of the supply delivery system is the sum of all the costs associated with every activity of the supply stream. However, most companies don't look beyond the quoted unit price to make the decision of where to source. It's been my experience that I have sometimes lost an order for as little as 10 to 20 cents per part, because they're only looking at the piece price. Whereas total cost of ownership should include the geographical location of the vendor, what transportation alternatives you have, whether it's going to be local by truck or rail, whether it's going to have to come by air or ship from an overseas country, inventory costs and control, the costs of your quality controls, the reserve capacity of your vendor. What that means is how fast can your vendor ramp up to higher production if your product sells faster than you projected, or if the market slows down, will they be willing to slow down in the production and take smaller orders? The responsiveness of the vendor to your needs is also important. And then you need to have a vendor that has a technological depth to be able to understand any quality problems or any design changes to be able to do them. If they have a lack of technology understanding, they will be difficult to be able to make design changes and solve quality problems. In 2010, the Reshoring Initiative was founded by Harry Mosier. He was at that time the CEO of GF Adjicharmi, and then he was on his way to retiring. So he actually developed a worksheet calculator spreadsheet to calculate the hidden costs of doing business offshore. He founded a nonprofit organization, ReshoreNow.org, when he left GF Adjicharmi, and his objective was to change the sourcing mindset from offshore is cheaper to local reduces the total cost of ownership, to encourage production to be near a company's customer. And I became connected with Harry Mosier actually only 4 months after he started ReshoreNow.org, because I was familiar with the concept of total cost of ownership, and from the worksheets from the American Mold Builders Association and the American Machining and Tooling Industry. They had hard copy worksheets that you could use So I wrote an article about why it was important to understand total cost of ownership. And Harry contacted me and said, "You're writing about what I just started." So he trained me in how to use his worksheet calculator. And for a while, we actually emailed it to people and for them to use. But that way, we had no way to capture the data of who was using the worksheet and whether companies were actually bringing business back from offshore to the United States. So he changed it so that the worksheet is now online. You fill it out online with all the information related to your part or product, and then you receive the conclusion and recommendation of how much comparison of how much it would cost for the United States versus offshore. So that's now available. So here's the difference. The total cost of ownership captures 100% of the costs. Landed costs includes shipping, but your purchase price is ignoring at least 23% or more of the total costs. So you're not getting an accurate indication of your total cost from just considering the purchase price for the part or assembly. So here's an example of some assumptions that have been used, like the Chinese unit price is $70 versus US unit price of 100. Estimated 12,000 units a year, estimate the weight, the shipments per year, the product life, the cost of packaging, whether you have to pay on shipment versus receipt, what if an estimate of a quality cost for quality problems, product liability risk, intellectual property risk. He's quantified all these hidden variables. Do you have to make trips to the country and so forth? So when you do all those considerations in this worksheet, it comes up with this showing you what the difference is. And you can see it may look like you have a difference at the first year, but by year 4 you're equal, and by year 5 you're less. So that's an example of the kind of information you would get from using the Reshore Now worksheet calculator that's free to use. So how do you select the first parts or products to make in the US or reshore if you have an existing product where you already have an existing company selling a product? The number one reason is if your intellectual property is at risk. If your labor content is less than 30%, you never should have gone offshore in the first place. If you're having problems with quality, if your lead time is too long and you're not getting a product fast enough to meet your customer demands, or the minimum purchase lot size is too large so that you have to have a high safety stock, which increases your inventory costs. If it's large, heavy, or bulky parts, it will be costly to ship then. And if your product design results in shipping too much air. One of the products that came back from offshore is a hula hoop. Just think of how much air is in a hula hoop. Coming in a container from China, a container full of hula hoops has a lot of air. So they reshored making hula hoops to the United States several years ago. Whammo is the company that produces those. So the top 10 reasons for bringing back manufacturing of the top 10 industries that have reshored are transportation equipment, electrical equipment, appliances and components, computer and electronic products, plastic and rubber products, machinery, wood and paper products, and fabricated metal products. Apparels and textile at the time was not on the as high as it is now, but with the pandemic and all the different shall we say products made for the medical industry and personal protection equipment, apparels and textiles really jumped up in the last year and a half because of the COVID pandemic. So here's some major reshores that have come back from offshore to the United States. There's Whammo right there on the right side. And I've got a few short stories here. General Electric was actually one of the first major companies that brought production back from China to their factory in Louisville, Kentucky that I had the pleasure of visiting about 4 years ago. They brought back their water heater first, and since then they brought back refrigerators and washing machines. They redesigned the water heater to assemble it horizontally instead of vertically, and they eliminated some parts or consolidated parts. So it brought back 1,300 jobs in their renovated facility. So it's really been a benefit to the Louisville, Kentucky area. So Diving Unlimited brought back manufacturing from China to San Diego. And the main reasons were quality and proximity to customers. Think of diving equipment. Your life can be at risk if your diving equipment fails. And also, where is likely to be the highest market for buying diving equipment? Southern California. So they had a better, closer to their customers by moving manufacturing back from China to San Diego. Lightsaver returned from China to San Clemente, and the reasons were to save costs and reduce delivery lead time. And it was 2 to 5% cheaper when you consider all the costs, and the communication was too difficult. I like this, especially Kane, because it's been very difficult to find women's apparel made in the USA. So they brought business back from China to the garment district of Los Angeles. And the reasons were quality control, rising labor and duty costs in China. More nimble companies are able to capitalize on fashion trends and get products to market faster. And more sophisticated manufacturing techniques that are used now means that it's no longer as expensive as it was previously. Some local manufacturers have reshored in the last several years. DonJoy, GJO, they make orthopedic equipment. They returned manufacturing early on. In fact, they were one of the first ones that I was able to write about in my book that came out in 2009, my Can American Manufacturing Be Saved book. Echo ATM, Fluid Master, 451 Degrees, LHV Power, Cebotics, Solitube. Solitube was an interesting story that I wrote about because they actually set up a manufacturing facility themselves in China. And they wanted to take advantage of selling to the Chinese market, but they actually picked the wrong location. They got in a zone that was beneficial if you were going to be exporting your products, but to sell into the country, you had to pay tariffs to sell into China. And they also have some very proprietary intellectual property that was, they were afraid of, getting stolen. So they wound up not being in China even 2 years before they brought the manufacturing back to the United States. Vanneman Manufacturing bought sheet metal parts, and they wound up finding out that they weren't saving as much money as they could because of the cost of shipping heavy metal parts back. And so they found a local manufacturer that was willing to do drop shipments just in time and use recyclable packaging that could be used over and over again. And their vendor was less than 5 miles away from them, so they really saved transportation costs. So those are some of the local stories of companies that came back to San Diego region from China. There's definitely advantages to sourcing here in the United States. You naturally have a ease of communication by speaking the same language. You have many flexible delivery methods of getting your products with reliable transportation. You have smoother design changes. You have a lower cost of inventory because you don't have to have as high a quantity of safety stock because you have faster delivery. You have higher quality by US manufacturers that are using the materials that you specify and not substituting inferior materials. You have lower travel costs If you have to visit your vendor, it's much cheaper to go visit a vendor here in the United States, and you have no intellectual property infringement, and you have more favorable purchase order and credit terms. You know, many companies in China require you to even pay a down payment when you place your order, or you have to pay for the order when it's shipped. Whereas here in the United States, you have credit terms where you pay in either 30 to 45 days after you receive the product and you receive the invoice. So that is better for cash flow management. So here's some of the advantages for today's supply chain that's been really visible, especially in the last 4 to 5 years. Reshoring helps companies with faster lead times. It's about a 49 to 50% reduction. You have delivery accuracy that's improved by 30 to 40%. And you can respond swiftly to unforeseen disruptions, whether it's a natural disaster like we're having right now down in Louisiana with the hurricane, or whether it's a flood or any other, tornado. Those are kinds of unforeseen disruptions. A strike by the, truckers can cause you problems. And then you're also able to respond to the volatile demand of your customers, because if you're closer to your customer, you're a more agile manufacturer. You can better serve your customers. And then you have higher competitiveness by serving local markets while maintaining low costs. Another factor that's really coming into effect in the last 3 years especially is consumers are more interested in buying made in USA, and even willing to pay a higher price for buying made in USA. And we certainly learned the hard way in the last year and a half that we can't be dependent on China as we have been for getting things, because China kept the mass production to themselves, and we had a shortage of mass, and a lot of US manufacturers had to ramp up making mass and other ventilators and other equipment that was needed to address the coronavirus pandemic. And it's become really apparent that we are in danger of not being able to get products that we need from China. Right now, the biggest problem we're having getting products from China is for ICs, chips. China, there's a big long lead time now for your ICs, because we have become too dependent on getting chips from China. And our chip manufacturers in the United States, many of them sourced manufacturing in China and gave up producing them in the United States. And they've now had to build new plants. There's several new plants in the works for bringing back chip production to the United States. And we have to be able to get products to service our military and defense industries, and you will. And the requirements by the defense agencies and military have become much stricter for buying made in USA. So if you're inventing a product that would be used by the military or defense industry, you actually cannot have it made offshore. It has to be now 100% made in the United States to be able to get a contract with a defense contractor or a military agency directly. So these Congress has woke up, and they're passing laws, and they're passing different executive orders. President Trump started it, and even President Biden has continued it and hasn't done away with any of those executive orders for made in USA by American that were established under the Trump administration. So what can you do for designing a new product? Well, select US suppliers whenever possible. You can use the total cost of ownership tools to select the location of vendors or to reshore products from Asia. That's free at the website reshorenow.org. and you can, learn some lessons by going to their website. They have over 3,000 stories now on their website. So you can look for a particular industry, for particular kinds of products, and get examples of products that have been brought back to the United States. So you will see that it's an advantage for you to have a made in USA product and use American manufacturers and utilize an additive manufacturing to get your product to market by having made in USA products. So I am available for consultation. And I have met with many inventors over the last 10 years as a board member for the San Diego Inventors Association. And I would be happy to provide you with a free 1-hour consultation. Just contact me at my contact information here, Michele mnashhoff at electrofab.com, or give me a call at my cell phone number. So, and you can also learn about some of the things I've written about by signing up to get my blog at savingusmanufacturing.com. And you can also take a look at some of my books for sale that are for sale on Amazon and talked about on my website.
Thanks, Michele. Be sure to contact Michele at www.electrofab.com. I'm Sidney Wildsmith, Board Secretary for the San Diego Inventors Forum. Beginning at 8 p.m. Pacific Time, September 9th, Michele will be available to answer any questions you may have about her presentation for about a half hour on our scheduled Zoom call. To participate, go to www.zoom.com, enter meeting code ID 720-6804-4288, and use passcode capital Q, capital O, B, D, U, capital N. We thank you for your continued interest and encourage you to visit our website to keep abreast of how we will be continuing our meetings throughout the remainder of the year. Visit our website at www.sdinventors.org. As inventors, we are the innovators, creating solutions to the challenges of our world. As things change, so must we. Keep moving forward with your dreams and hopes for a better world. Until next time, this is Sidney Wildsmith saying adios.